Welcome to Your Digital Reputation. Here's your host, Roger Christie.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. My name's Roger Christie, founder of reputation advisory firm Propel, and host of the Your Digital Reputation podcast, where we talk to industry leaders about how they get social media right, how they build trust in the moments that matter most. Now, we've been lucky enough to hear from plenty of leaders over the years, sharing how they've found their voice and confidence and the valuable practical things they do to build trust and connection online. But my guest today and her story might just take that value to another level. You'll not only hear how her online journey started, you'll also hear about the amazing professional opportunities her efforts have unlocked over the years. Opportunities that have led her on a wonderfully rewarding professional journey and into the Your Digital Reputation studio today. Now, she has far too many credentials for me to summarize in one introduction, but my guest today is a non-executive director and chair overseeing multi-billion-dollar national investments, and who thrives at the intersection of breakthrough innovation and measured risk. She's guided well over 1,200 innovations over the past 25 years and has been recognized on the Victorian Honour Roll of Women as a trailblazer. She's a superstar of STEM and a LinkedIn top voice as well. And she co-hosts the Women Transforming Food podcast. Dr Angeline Achariya, what a pleasure it is to host you on the Your Digital Reputation podcast.
Oh, hello, Roger, and so exciting to be here. I have only ever heard all of your podcasts, so it's been like one of those milestones to be right here. So thank you so much for having me.
Very kind. And it is, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because similarly, I've kind of floated around circles that you've been involved with, seen and read a lot about you. And now here we are having this conversation as a reflection of the wonderful things that you've been able to accomplish online. But right up front, if I can just say that if I look at your journey, what it reminds me, I suppose, is that it reminds everyone, not just me, of the enormous power and impact that our online efforts can have when it comes to our professional careers, our journeys, and how with real intentionality and authenticity and a little dash of courage as well, you can truly create the future that you're after. Can you take us back to when you essentially stepped out from the security of what was Mondelez at the time and started the Food Innovation Centre at Monash? What was happening and why did you do it?
Oh, wow. And thank you. There's so many stories, but I would say, yes, that is a moment in time that I would say, I was with Mondelez back then and it was 2013, I went in there. About 2016 is when we were transitioning the centre. So just a little bit of a backstory. Mondelez International, the home of Cadbury Dairy Milk and a number of snacks, really big global. We used to call it, the gorilla in the business of snacks, for instance. And I was fortunate enough, having been in that business, to have Mondelez behind me. We had clear processes, we had a clear role, but I kept seeing these gaps in the innovation system and particularly around commercialization. So when the opportunity arose to take the model that we as a team had built over the 3 years in Mondelez, which was called Mondelez Food Innovation Centre, to Monash University, the key question I remember asking myself is, do I want to stay safe or do I want to create something that could genuinely shift how we approach systems-led innovation in Australia? And Rog, even getting to that question was not like a light bulb moment. It actually came over time. And I was really terrified, right? At Mondelez, I found, if we succeeded, the company succeeded. If we failed, the company was there as underwriting the risk, if you will. And suddenly I was facing something that, I had to face into something that didn't exist yet. And that forced me to really confront whether I was actually believed in my own expertise and could I stake my reputation on it.
Where does the digital side of it come into this decision-making process? And where did you first decide, I suppose, to be more intentional with how you turned up online?
Yeah, look, I think the digital side was always there. And look, before I, did the Food Innovation Centre model, I was with lots of large global businesses, so Fonterra, Mars, Yum, to name a few. And of course, I was on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been my best mate in my career throughout that time. And people would connect with me, but they were really connecting with the organisation I worked in, the title I carried back in the day, and so you knew that, but when you're building something new, you realize very quickly that people are actually investing in people and not just the institutions we belong to or the title of the day that we happen to have. And what I learned was I needed to establish that trust with industry partners, who are going to be our future clients, with researchers, with startups, with investors. And they needed to know who I was, not, some title that was there, what I stood for, whether I could really deliver on the ambitious promises that we were making. And so my digital presence, in a way, let's call it my proof of concept before we had any tangible results to show. So it was really important. And right at the start, God, I made every mistake that you could make. I posted, the very boring company updates. I'd share other people's content because I was too afraid to add my perspective in. You're playing it safe. Try and sound that professional rather than, I'm genuinely helping. And I think that real shift came for me is when I started asking real questions about innovation commercialization, which was the center that we were all about. Instead of pretending I had all the answers, or I thought I had all the answers, and ask the question, what if we kind of really approach this agri-food innovation in a different way? And those questions became posts. So that was courageous to actually put those out there. And I started having conversations with people that I needed to connect with.
If I'm understanding you right, it sounds like there was a real shift not only in the recognition that you as an individual are a different entity and that people are interested in that entity more than, as you called it, like your title within an organization. And then at the same time, recognizing that that individual voice and individual perspective is in fact a really valuable vehicle or bridge even to form connections with people across industry that you couldn't actually do if you stayed in the safe space of spouting the usual corporate message that others might share that is generic and, lacks personality and lacks that personal touch. Is that a fair reflection of the kind of awakening, if you will, of you being essentially your own brand now, you being the person that needed to turn up online as you do offline, forming connections with people that would actually help you on your way?
Oh, absolutely. Well played back. And I want to say right now, yes, Rog, it was one of those moments that happened, but no, I think it was over time. And only, when I went, if you think about it, in all the corporate roles I had the very cushy budgets, the backing of corporate. And then I was doing a startup, where I really literally, even every dollar mattered, right? And being the CEO of that meant that I did not have the marketing budgets that I was used to. I did not have, a comms person. So it came down to me to actually do that. And I had to really strategically think different, but also push myself and have that courage that we spoke about earlier as well.
Did you look at it as, wow, what an opportunity to actually turn up and build these relationships online? And my goodness, how many people can I access this way that I perhaps haven't been able to before? Or did you see it more as a bit of a grudge thing, a bit of a necessary evil that, now I'm going to have to go and do this? Whereas, as you said, maybe I've had a bit of extra scaffolding before in the past.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I'm very much an optimistic pragmatist, I say, and I see the possibilities. So for me, and the realization, if I recall back, I remember an industry partner sort of saying to me, we're not just investing in the Food Innovation Centre, we're investing in your vision, how you could actually make this work. And so this, was quite thrilling, but also really terrifying for me as well. And it was probably a number of those moments that actually made me really reflect and say, what are you going to do different, right? And you talked a little bit about that brand piece as well. And many, many years ago when I was probably a junior cat, a mentor early in my career said to me, Ange, start to think of yourself as a brand. And I didn't even know what that meant, right? She goes, think of yourself as Ange Inc. And that was way long before LinkedIn ever came into my life. And while I want to sit here and go, yeah, that was maybe the defining moment to start thinking that way, but I actually probably didn't take it and do anything with it, And I think fast forward down, it's probably then sparked in me thinking about myself, not just as a brand, but being also strategic and authentic about how I build the brand. And of course, I've worked in consumer goods, right? So it probably comes a little bit naturally to me being in those kind of roles and organizations that I've worked in. But I started, and I mentioned my LinkedIn journey and that digital journey. And LinkedIn is probably by far the most social media that I use from both a personal, professional sense. And I realized that every LinkedIn interaction I started to have, every speaking engagement, so I go and speak at different forums, every conversation I was having, it was either building or diminishing trust in what we were creating. And that was a huge responsibility to have, right? And I found that there was this blurring of the lines between who I was as a person versus the professional reputation as well. And I think this is where that authenticity started to come in. So just like any startup success, it is tied to the people and people believing in, our collective effort. And while I was the leader, it was a team that was collective there in delivering the success and the promises that we had actually put out there as well.
So that's an interesting little insight I'm taking from what you're saying, that startup mentality. What I find interesting about what you're saying, though, it was a recognition that you were operating that way despite having come from a large enterprise background. You were operating that way because people were interested in people and there was a need to be more visible because of that startup ethos and that startup journey that you were going on. But I actually wonder if the real clue or the real value that's come out of that startup movement and the way that people behave online, it is actually more about the people-to-people connection. Because I'd argue that whether you're a startup or not, even in large enterprise, at the end of the day, people are interested in who you are and what you do as a person, even if you are a representative of. And I think that's the shift. What we're seeing is universally a move towards an interest in the individuals that we work with, a move towards a deeper interest and a deeper connection, a closer values alignment, those sorts of things. And so regardless of what industry sector or what size of organization you're working in, everyone must realize that people sitting across the table from them in a physical environment are interested in them as individuals as much as the work that they do. And so what you've been saying, and I'm just kind of piecing things together as we go, but what you were saying right at the start about that shift from a title and a role on a business card, for example, to being an individual who had a set of responsibilities and who needed to go out and build those relationships yourself. For me, that reflects the same shift, that same shift in dynamic. That is, we are all professionals and we all have professional relationships and people are interested in other people.
Yeah, being curious. And I think it's take away whatever, the role you have in the day. It's actually being curious about the human opposite you, next to you and asking the questions and leaning in, I think. And regardless of big business, medium or small, wherever I've been, it's always about the people and the relationships. And you carry those with you through your whole career and your life at the end of the day. And some of my great friends have come from roles that I've worked in, right? We've stopped working together, but we carry that friendship over the years as well.
And so you mentioned that word curiosity, Angeline, and I'm interested in that angle as well, because arguably to have good relationships, you've got to be curious. You've got to care about the people in your professional lives, as you were saying. So with that curiosity bent on it, I suppose, when you first started stepping out and when you were, through the Food Innovation Centre and those early steps that you were taking online and working out loud and sharing some of the progress you were making, asking questions, all that sort of stuff. For me, that's laced with that idea of curiosity. Did you feel that people gravitated towards that they were equally curious about what you were doing? And by inviting them into that journey, that may have even helped you build some of those stronger, or maybe accelerated the relationship building for you.
I think so. I think, I want to say, yeah, I knew that was going to happen, but no, I think the hindsight that you can go back to now and say, absolutely, I think it's that curiosity, but it's also that authenticity, right? I mean, you can be curious to a transaction, or you can be curious without actually taking anything or just giving, I think, just as a curious human being. And I think those kind of human skills that we're all taught, and sometimes we learn the hard way over time through feedback, gives us that sense of, I guess, authentic way to engage with people and to learn, to want to know. I mean, I'm always asking, the why, and wanting to know the stories behind the person, because a lot of the times I think, we can sit there and, we might, we come with our own filters, and therefore we can sit there and judge or whatever. But I think if we just take that away and go, hang on, where is this person coming from? What is their perspective? And the other thing I found, Roger, was actually just giving myself the permission to be this work in progress. I think I talked earlier about not having the answers necessarily, right? So therefore also not having to have that polished post, for instance, or whatever it is that I was putting out. But if I shared it as a learning and I learned with it, I think that actually helped me build trust with, the people who engaged with me, the followers that came on afterwards and things like that. So that was really important lesson, I think, that I learned along in those early days.
So I'm keen to pick into that a little bit too, because I would argue that a lot of people feel naturally uncomfortable with that idea of sharing the work in progress, sharing that we don't have all the answers, because I think there is an expectation that when we turn up to speak online and we post on our platform of choice, when we do that, we assume that we have to come from a position of, here's what I think about the world, and here's how I see it, and this is why you should either see it the same way or be challenged by the way that I see it. What you're describing there is actually quite different, and something that leaves things unanswered, leaves gaps, and potentially presents the opportunity for other people to come in and fill those gaps. When you say you gave yourself permission to do that, is that something that's always been part of your DNA, or is that something that you made a conscious decision about online because you felt that it, inviting people into that conversation would actually be a positive thing for you and the industry at large?
I think No, I wasn't always like this, right? So look, I studied science, right? And in science, you kind of put your facts out there and you put your expert opinion, and then you kind of, back it with evidence, for instance. But along my journey, being a manager, then being in leadership roles and working with people, I used to find a lot of my team would come to me and go, ta-da, here's a perfect piece, right? And then I would kind of go, okay, let me work through this, ask some questions, become curious. And what I'd find is that, initially they'd kind of get a little bit frustrated going, oh, hang on, maybe I should have actually come and spoken to you earlier or got some insights, right? So that calibration is so important along the way. And I guess I've taken a lot of that leadership lessons that I learned into my digital world as well, and kind of applied it the same way. The fact that then I went through the startup experience and kind of learned, through design-led thinking, asking questions, being curious, looking at the system as a whole. And so a lot of the times, even for myself, I actually probably have more answers than I have questions. I remember in my last role at JR Simplot, I looked after a team of over 100, right? And my very first day when we had an afternoon tea to welcome me, I was the first leader that they had that says, I don't know what I don't know, guys. And this room, and you are the room, are probably going to be much, much smarter than me. And so many people afterwards came back and said to me, oh my goodness, we've never heard a leader say that. Aren't you supposed to have all the answers? And I think, these are all the lessons that I have banked over the years that you ultimately draw from. I think the fact that if you're in 100% in real time versus if you're in digital, you have to be the real you. And some people sometimes hide behind things. That's not me. I think I've just kind of put it out there. And that does mean it's a risk, right? Some people will like it and some people won't. And therefore you have to also cop the other side as well. So that just comes with the territory.
So do you find that with that mindset, have you always been maybe as inclined, if not more inclined, to follow along with what other people are doing online, ask questions, comment, contribute that way, versus seeing this as an environment for you to share your 2 cents? Have you found that that is naturally more, or comes more naturally to you, because you recognize straight off the bat that you don't have all the answers, and so therefore listening into other conversations and participating in that way will be as beneficial for you as it is for others?
Oh, yeah. And I call myself a lifelong student, right? I'm a learner. So I think when you go in with that mindset, you are naturally curious, you're naturally wanting to learn. And you probably see my comments and they're probably usually the same. I certainly do not go there and preach, if you will. For me, it's that curiosity of leaning in and learning. And if I have a view, I'll share it. But a lot of the times I'm actually just being curious and seeing how others' views may actually shift my perspectives on something. That's what I'm more open about. Because no, I don't have all the answers in everything either. And that's never where I want to be either.
It's interesting though, isn't it? The digital world and the digital breadcrumbs that we all leave behind us with every action that we take, they certainly reveal a pathway that we've chosen. And it's surprising the amount of people that still think we can manufacture that. Whereas people actually want to see the wrinkles. They want to see the failures. They want to see the things that don't work. And that actually makes us much more relatable and approachable. Yeah. You talked about that moment when you realized, that idea of Angeline Inc., which I really like. I like that framing around personal brand. I'm interested in how that then applied in those early days when you started using social media more purposefully and LinkedIn as your best friend, as you put it. So what if you can share a little bit about how you were practically using the platform in those early days, and certainly what were the things that you did online and what had a material impact on the opportunities you would ultimately access through your career?
Yeah, and I mentioned, the boring things I was doing, like just sharing the company stuff, and reposting without any kind of thing. And then I kind of realized, and I think those moments of truth, like doing the Food Innovation Center journey and that startup mentality, I realized that I developed what I call myself sort of this helpful truth filter, if you will. And the reason was I kept seeing stuff on LinkedIn where you can just post all about yourself, right? Or there were other posts that was really around helping others and educating or capability building. And so I had to choose where it is that I wanted my sweet spot to be. And that's where I developed this truth filter that I still apply today. So before any post that I do, and of course you need to be strategic about what kind of things you want to post about and things like that, which I can share, I would ask the question, is this helpful to my community or the tribe that is obviously the followers that you've gathered, but also the others that you want to reach out to, the ones that I serve. And I think that's always been my mentality, is who am I serving with the content that I'm putting out? And is it truthful about my experience? And if I answer yes to both of those, then I post. And even if it's vulnerable, and I think it's probably been the last maybe under 5 years, Roger, where I've started to put a lot more of me out there as a result of it as well, because that does take a lot of courage, right? And like I said, I get feedback, good, bad, and ugly from all of this, right? And so I need to be comfortable in what I'm then putting out, but also accepting those things that it may not always resonate with everyone.
So how did you learn to get comfortable with that idea of being vulnerable? And you've talked about, or we've both talked about, this idea of courage. We've touched on it. When you, over the past 5 years, as you're describing it, decided to be that little bit more vulnerable, to share more of your authentic experiences and the things that make you who you are, how did you work up the courage to do that? And how, practically speaking, what advice would you give to people in taking those steps?
I think for me, it was all of my leadership roles. So, when you're a leader, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be absolutely authentic. So I think through that practice of leadership over 20 odd years of leading teams, in local areas, in regional, global, different cultures, all of that, I had to naturally learn to step into that space. And I believe I've taken that, and I've talked about being the same me that I am in person and in digital world, is what I think has helped me kind of do that transition. And yeah, while it's been tough, I think even as a leader to be vulnerable, because like I said, everybody wants a leader to know all the answers, for instance, and even declaring something like I did in my last role, meant that I was really able to break a lot of the barriers and be the human person. Because I think a lot of the times people see you as, oh, you're the executive director of global growth, whatever. Where's the human in you? And I think unearthing and sharing some of those actually makes you like a real person. And yeah, just like every person, I make the mistakes, I learn from it, hopefully, and kind of, try and be the best version of myself each time. So I think a lot of that has helped me transition that the same way into my digital presence as well.
What you just touched on, though, and I think that's a really important message and lesson for everyone listening, these two people, offline and online, have to match up.
Absolutely.
And so why, in your opinion, do you think, if we have seen that move in leadership in offline circles, in your opinion, why is it still that a lot of leaders are perhaps holding back or feeling held back when it comes to the digital world, based on your own journey and those you've rubbed shoulders with?
Yeah, and I think I'll probably go back to remember with all the roles that I worked in big corporate, there are rules. You have to comply by the rules of what you can and cannot say, the impact that will have back to the brand or the organization you're associated with. And I think those do create some barriers. And I even remember being in those roles, you were read the right act of what you can and cannot say. So I think that does probably curtail people a little bit, and makes you a little bit more conscious of what you can put out there. But it's actually finding the right balance. And for me, I think that balance was using the platforms like the Food Innovation Centre as a way to be able to do that. Now using, my current portfolio of roles that I am doing. But also I think I took another step is to go, actually, I'm not defined by the roles and the titles that I carry. I probably am defined in that moment in the role that I am, but at the end of the day, I'm actually building my career. And therefore, in my career, when I'm 80, I want to look back and I go, what are the great things that I actually impacted? And so for me, it has been really quite strategic, and it changes over the years. But at the minute, there are probably a few areas that I'm really, really passionate about. And that's what I've said that I will actually build my thought leadership on, if you will, my learning lessons, what I want to share with others, and the types of conversations I want to have as well. So I guess what I'm saying is it is possible, even if you're bound by some of those things, is to then look at the higher piece that you bring, if that's what you want to do. Not everybody wants to do that either. So it is a choice. It's always a choice, I think.
Absolutely. You do have a choice. And I think it's interesting too, because I've certainly had many conversations with people in similar positions to you, that non-executive director, chair style role, who feel that the further they go in their careers, the more they stand to lose and the greater the risks. And yet what you're describing here represents the idea that you have choice and there is plenty of space within that risk for you to actually be very purposeful, intentional, and to have a legacy, for want of a better word, to leave that impact at a greater scale than you might otherwise be able to do in a physically constrained world. Angeline, I'm interested in, you have got to where you are, and you have obviously got the, the runs on the board, so to speak. You've got
still going, Roger.
Still not out, definitely not out. No, I understand that.
Not out.
But what I find interesting is as you look back, like you have the benefit of hindsight looking back, as you said earlier, and going, well, I didn't necessarily plan things that way, but they've worked out well. And it wasn't necessarily strategic, but those decisions were intentional and they've helped you along the way. As you look back, even with all that stuff being the case, I'm interested to know.
Absolutely, absolutely bloody loosely. I think look, if I had LinkedIn when that mentor gave me that advice, right, back in the day. So here's a message to LinkedIn, you should have started earlier. I would have, had so many immense benefit, I think, than just, the traditional way of networking. It would have probably accelerated so much of, I think, the things. But I'm very grateful also of where I've been able to start as well. So I think one thing I've learned is that there's this compound effect, I want to call it, right? The compound effect of consistent digital engagement, would have really helped my career, maybe even in more different ways, who knows. But what I've learned is that you have to start building your digital reputation, not when you need it, because then you become desperate, Roger, right? It's actually, you have to start building it in a very strategic way. And that's why I refer to LinkedIn as my career partner in a sense, as opposed to just seeing it as a tool that I leverage or that I use. So for me, I think, sitting here, I'm grateful that I went through the transition period, the learning lessons that I've learned. But in that time, it helped me get actually clearer about and actually forced me to think about who it is that I am, who I am, and know myself. And I'm still learning who myself is, but what I actually want to stand for. And therefore, what do I actually want to also talk about and put out there as well? And perhaps, the hindsight piece, going back, this is probably what I would say is the big lessons that I've learned through that time as well.
I think that's such wise advice, and reflections, and I think it hopefully a really encouraging, again, another encouraging message to people who are listening. And I'm wondering if I can probe a little bit further and say, if people are sitting there listening today and they're going through or about to face their own transition moment, if I can call it that, what advice would you give them? When is the best time to start looking at this stuff, and what should they be doing as a priority?
Well, I'm going to put it first out there. I am still learning, but here's 3 things that I have learned that I'd love to share. So firstly, I want you to start before you think you're even ready. So many of us wait till we go, the perfect moment when we're ready. You don't have to wait for your next time that you post to have figured out everything about what a digital presence needs to be. So I'd think about it this way, and this is what I've learned, so I'm just sharing what's worked for me, is identify one conversation that you genuinely care about and start contributing to it with consistency. Not once 3 months you pop up and you come in. No, put it in your diary, remind yourself. But don't sell, right? Create value, add value rather than use it as a selling point. Nothing pisses anyone off than when you're selling. I get that all the time. Secondly, share your learning journey. And that's worked for me, not just your achievements. I think sometimes we go up, and I do share my achievements, but I always try and frame it in a learning thing as well, because that's what I take out of it. And that's naturally who I am. So people want to work with leaders who can navigate that uncertainty. And I think, when you become that authentic person and you share the learning journey, not just your achievement, people resonate with that. And thirdly, I think, you've got to engage really meaningfully with others' content. So if you are just popping up and sharing your own and running off, it's not going to work. I don't think it's going to work. I think, building those relationships and sharing value is so important than just building the follower numbers, for instance. So that is probably the 3 things, and it's a patient process, the art of patience. I learned that when I worked in Japan, and I'm still trying to learn it myself. And, I talked about LinkedIn being this, digital reputation really being a compound interest. You've got to just chip away, and the magic happens over time and not overnight. So it's really about that courage, consistency, and clarity would be the 3 C's that I would put with my 3 practical examples that I shared.
Very nice. And I do agree with that idea of compounding, or the flywheel effect, making sure that you're doing these behaviors regularly, consistently, but also importantly with intent, with purpose behind them, to make sure you're heading in the right direction. But how I take that and interpret that too, and I think there's a really neat thread there, Angeline, this idea that you're giving more than you take. You're contributing. And I would say, don't create noise, create value. So I love that sharing value idea, because we turn up, and when we have a me-centered mindset, we go, what can I say? Versus how can I contribute value? Yeah. And value isn't necessarily, as you said, it could be connecting people. It could be encouraging other people. It could be asking a great question. Value is far more important, and obviously far more valuable than content, far more valuable than noise. So spending more time on others and creating value, not noise. I just think that these ideas are threaded throughout your whole story, and it kind of summed up in that idea of listening to other people, asking questions, being part of the community rather than the person standing out front waving the flag. I'm getting this sense that it is very much a collaborative approach to your own journey that, as you said, is still evolving. So I'm interested to know, though, and maybe this is a good place to finish without giving too much away. You've given us such a rich idea of who you are as a person and how you lead and the way that you turn up online and offline. Where are you going next? And how will this asset, this digital reputation that you've built, how do you see it enabling the next steps in your career, which has a long way to go, I'll remind our listeners.
Yes, I have not done. Oh, look, I think when I decided to transition into this portfolio work and career and boards now, I actually learned that my digital presence, all the groundwork that I was doing all this time, I didn't realize how valuable that would be for me. So when I started to transition and having the conversations and expanding new networks and things, I found out that all that thing I've been doing online had actually become almost my informal references, if you will, because people were aware of me. They had seen what I was putting out there. They had seen the value that I was creating for them, right? So I find myself at this very exciting inflection point now, and it is exciting. In my portfolio career, a term I only learned in 2023, and I'm seeing opportunities to influence. We're talking about innovation. We're talking about productivity, about commercialization in this country. And I believe I can really influence, at a bigger scale of the innovation ecosystem. And so my digital presence now has become my lab for testing ideas, if you will, before they become broader conversations. So as I talked about in leadership, for me, leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about asking better questions and sharing that journey. And I'm increasingly now focused on, and I alluded to this earlier, about where are the spaces that I'm really talking about now that you'll see. And it's around innovation leadership. It's around organizational culture with a good, strong dose of commercial reality and impact, tied with that as well. So my brand is becoming, it's not just about me, it's actually about the impact that I can create in the innovation system in Australia and globally. And then when I look at my digital reputation, it's a long-term investment back to that compound interest. So I'm creating the content today. Hopefully that becomes my professional asset portfolio for tomorrow's opportunities, because it is all about endless possibilities at the end of the day.
I'm excited listening to you describe it.
I hope I can make it. Come back to me in a few years.
Well, it kind of, in a way it doesn't matter, because it is the work in progress. That's the beauty of it.
Absolutely.
The fact that, as you said, that learning mindset, the lifelong student. And can I just say too that what I hope is that particularly, so where you've come from and where you're headed, the company that you now keep, I really hope that people are watching along and they're not only observing what you're doing, but they're using that as an opportunity to reflect on what they either are or aren't doing. And that they see the enormous potential, as you've described it today, of being that lifelong student, having an active interest in others, asking really good questions that, let's be frank, with years of experience behind you, you ask better questions. And so the quality of the questions is only going to go up when we have our most senior levels of leadership that are guiding not only this country and not only the sector that you're involved with, but all sectors and all countries. The quality of what we're able to achieve as a society will go up if we have those people contributing and asking better questions. So I'm sincerely hopeful, if I can be hopeful about the future, that people will look at your example and follow along in their own way, of course, but follow along, being encouraged by the fact that it can be done, and it can be done in a very smart and strategic way. So, Angeline, with that in mind and with everything we've covered today, I am sure there's a couple of new groupies who are now listening and thinking, how can they follow along? How can they turn up and ask you questions and things like that too? What is the best way for them to reach you these days?
Oh, of course, my favorite platform, LinkedIn. Where else? Yes, my career partner. Please reach out. I am prolific on there. I always respond to every message, whether I can help or I can't. I always do respond, because I think that's a human courtesy we need to afford each other. It's a baseline given.
You've set a wonderful example today. So, Dr. Angeline Achariya, thank you so much for being part of the Your Digital Reputation podcast.
Oh, thank you, Roger. I had fun. Thank you.
Thanks again for listening. If you've learned something from today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. For all show notes, head to propelgroup.com.au. Thanks again for listening.